Late one quiet night, a Mustang roared down an empty highway for exactly 65 kilometers. But this wasn't just a normal drive. Inside the car was something so unexpected that when the truth finally came out, everyone who heard the story was left speechless. On a quiet evening in a small town, the streets were calm and almost empty. The sky had turned dark blue, and the soft glow of streetlights lit the road. Most people were already at home finishing dinner or relaxing after a long day. It felt like an ordinary night. Nothing seemed unusual at first. Then the sound of a powerful engine broke the silence. A black Mustang sped past the main street, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The car moved quickly, faster than most drivers would dare to go on a road like this. The deep sound of the engine echoed between the buildings and caught the attention of a few people nearby. A man standing outside a small convenience store looked up in surprise. A couple walking their dog stopped and turned their heads as the car rushed past them. Even the dog paused, watching the bright lights disappear down the road. There was something strange about the way the car moved. It did not slow down at corners the way most drivers did. It did not hesitate. It moved with purpose, as if every second mattered. Inside the Mustang sat a driver whose face was tense and serious. Both hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The driver kept glancing at the road ahead, focused and determined. It was clear this was not just a late-night drive. The Mustang was headed out of town, toward a road that stretched for 65 kilometers. A long and quiet road that led to a place few people thought about at night. But what made this journey truly unusual was not the speed of the car or the distance it had to travel. It was what the Mustang carried inside, and the place where it had to arrive. The driver's name was Daniel Carter, a 35-year-old mechanic who had lived in the town his whole life. People knew him as a quiet and hard-working man. He owned a small repair shop near the edge of town, and most of his days were spent fixing engines, changing tires, and helping neighbors keep their cars running. Daniel loved cars, but the Mustang he was driving that night was special to him. It was not new or flashy. It was an older model that he had restored with his own hands over many years. Every bolt, every wire, and every part of the engine had been carefully repaired by him. The car was strong, fast, and reliable. Tonight Daniel needed that reliability more than ever. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as the Mustang moved along the dark road. His eyes stayed locked on the highway ahead, rarely blinking. The speedometer slowly climbed higher, but Daniel did not slow down. He could not afford to waste even a minute. Just 1 hour earlier, Daniel had received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end sounded urgent and worried. Someone needed help, and they needed it fast. The destination was exactly 65 kilometers away at a hospital in the next city. Normally, the drive would take more than an hour at night. But tonight, there was no time to follow the usual pace of traffic. Daniel pressed the gas pedal a little harder. The Mustang responded with a deep, powerful roar as it pushed forward into the empty highway. In the passenger seat beside him sat a small sealed container. Daniel glanced at it for only a moment before returning his eyes to the road. Whatever was inside that container was the reason for this desperate drive. And someone far away was waiting for it, hoping it would arrive before it was too late. The highway stretched out ahead of Daniel like a long dark ribbon. The lights of the town slowly faded in the rearview mirror until they were nothing more than small glowing dots in the distance. Now the road was quiet and nearly empty. Daniel kept his foot steady on the gas pedal as the Mustang moved deeper into the night. The engine sounded strong and smooth, just as he had always trusted it to be. The soft hum of the tires against the road filled the car, but Daniel barely noticed it. His full attention was locked on the road ahead. A light wind pushed across the highway, and the trees along the roadside moved gently in the darkness. Every few kilometers another lonely streetlight appeared, casting brief circles of pale yellow light on the asphalt before disappearing behind him again. Daniel quickly checked the dashboard clock. Time was moving too fast. He took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Panic would not help anyone tonight. What mattered was reaching the destination as quickly and safely as possible. The Mustang passed through a small rural intersection where the traffic light blinked yellow. Daniel slowed slightly, looked both ways, and then continued forward without stopping. There were no other cars in sight. A few minutes later, he noticed a set of headlights far behind him in the mirror. For a moment his heart beat faster, but the car stayed far back and soon turned off onto another road. The highway was empty once again. Daniel allowed himself a quick glance toward the passenger seat. The small sealed container rested there, carefully secured with a strap so it would not move while the car was in motion. He remembered the words he had heard on the phone earlier. "Every minute matters." Those words echoed in his mind again and again. Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel and gently pressed the gas pedal a little further. The Mustang responded instantly, the engine giving a deep, powerful growl as the speed increased. Kilometer after kilometer slipped by under the headlights. The road ahead remained long and dark, but Daniel refused to slow down. Somewhere 65 kilometers away, someone was waiting and hoping that this car would arrive in time. About 20 kilometers into the trip, the quiet highway no longer felt peaceful. The deeper Daniel drove into the countryside, the more the darkness seemed to close in around the road. The trees stood tall on both sides, their shadows stretching across the pavement under the glow of the Mustang's headlights. Daniel checked the dashboard clock again. Time was slipping away faster than he wanted. Suddenly, his phone began to ring. The sharp sound filled the car and made his heart jump. For a moment he kept his eyes on the road, then reached over and tapped the speaker button. "Hello," he said quickly. A worried voice came through the phone. It was the same voice that had called him earlier. "Daniel, where are you now?" "I'm about 20 kilometers out," Daniel replied while keeping his focus on the road. "I'm moving as fast as I can." There was a short pause before the voice spoke again, even more tense than before. "You have to hurry. They are getting weaker. The doctors are preparing everything, but they cannot wait much longer." Daniel swallowed and nodded even though the caller could not see him. "I understand," he said quietly. The call ended, leaving the car filled with silence again. Daniel pressed the gas pedal a little harder. The Mustang surged forward, its powerful engine echoing across the empty highway. A few minutes later he noticed flashing lights ahead in the distance. His stomach tightened. As the car moved closer, he realized it was a police vehicle parked on the side of the road with its lights slowly blinking. An officer stood nearby watching the passing traffic. Daniel's mind raced. He checked his speed and slowly eased his foot off the gas as he approached. For a few tense seconds, the officer looked directly at the Mustang as it passed. Then Daniel continued down the road, the flashing lights fading behind him. But the pressure inside the car felt heavier than ever. As the highway continued to stretch through the quiet countryside, Daniel felt the weight of the night pressing on him. The road ahead looked endless, but his mind was no longer only focused on the drive. Memories from earlier that evening began to return. Only a few hours ago, Daniel had been closing his repair shop for the day. It had been a normal evening. He had finished working on a customer's truck and was about to turn off the lights when his phone rang. At first he almost ignored it. After a long day of work, he was tired and ready to go home. But something made him answer. The voice on the phone sounded urgent and nervous. It was a nurse from the hospital in the nearby city. She explained that a young girl was in critical condition. Her life depended on a medical transplant that had just become available. The problem was distance. The life-saving organ had arrived at a small clinic in Daniel's town, but the hospital that could perform the operation was 65 kilometers away. The medical transport team that usually handled these situations was stuck dealing with another emergency far away. Time was running out. The nurse had been calling everyone she could think of, searching for someone with a reliable car who could make the trip immediately. Someone had mentioned Daniel's name because of his skill with cars and his fast Mustang. Daniel remembered standing in the quiet repair shop, holding the phone while the nurse spoke. "Without this organ," she had said softly, "the girl will not survive the night." Daniel had not asked many questions after that. He simply grabbed his keys, locked the shop, and drove to the clinic. Now, as the Mustang raced through the darkness, the sealed container beside him held the fragile hope of a family waiting desperately at the hospital. Daniel drove for several more minutes before he finally allowed himself another quick look at the container on the passenger seat. It was small, white, and tightly sealed. At first glance it looked ordinary, almost like a simple medical cooler. But Daniel knew it carried something far more important than it appeared. Inside that container was a human heart. It had been carefully packed by doctors at the small clinic in his town. The organ had arrived earlier that evening after a donor had been found in another city. Everything had happened quickly. Every second had become precious. The heart was meant for a young girl waiting at the hospital 65 kilometers away. Her name was Emily. She was only 10 years old, and she had been fighting a serious heart condition since she was born. For years her family had waited and hoped that a donor would finally become available. That moment had finally arrived tonight. But a transplant is not simple. A donated heart can only survive outside the human body for a short amount of time. Doctors had only a few hours to move it safely from one place to another. If it arrived too late, the chance to save Emily's life would be gone. That was why Daniel was on the road. The sealed container beside him was not just a box. It carried a child's only chance to live a normal life. Somewhere in the hospital ahead, a surgical team was already preparing the operating room. Emily's parents were sitting in a waiting area, holding each other and hoping that the heart would arrive before it was too late. Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel and pressed the gas pedal again. The Mustang surged forward through the dark highway. 65 kilometers suddenly felt like the most important journey of his life. The lights of the city finally appeared in the distance. At first they looked like small stars along the horizon. But as Daniel drove closer, the lights grew brighter and clearer. After nearly an hour of tense driving through dark highways and empty roads, he was finally approaching the place that had been waiting for him all night. The hospital. Daniel checked the dashboard clock again. His heart was beating almost as fast as the engine of the Mustang. He had driven as quickly and carefully as he could, but the real question still hung heavily in his mind. Had he arrived in time? Traffic began to appear as he entered the city streets. A few late-night cars passed through intersections, and several traffic lights glowed red and yellow above the road. Daniel slowed slightly but kept moving forward whenever the road cleared. Just a few more minutes. Then he saw the tall white building of the hospital rising ahead. Several floors were still brightly lit even at this late hour. Ambulances were parked near the entrance, and the emergency doors were open. Daniel quickly turned into the hospital driveway. As the Mustang rolled to a stop, he noticed a small group of people already waiting outside. 2 doctors, a nurse, and a hospital staff member rushed forward the moment the car stopped. Daniel stepped out quickly and opened the passenger door. He carefully lifted the sealed medical container from the seat, holding it with both hands as if it were made of glass. A doctor wearing blue surgical scrubs approached him immediately. "Are you Daniel?" the doctor asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes." Without wasting another second, Daniel handed over the container. The doctor received it with the same careful grip and quickly checked the label. A small look of relief crossed his face. "You made it just in time," the doctor said. Those words felt like a heavy weight lifting from Daniel's chest. The medical team quickly hurried back toward the hospital doors with the container. Inside the building, surgeons were already preparing the operating room where Emily was waiting. For the first time since the journey began, Daniel allowed himself to breathe slowly. He leaned against the side of the Mustang and watched as the hospital doors closed behind the doctors. Somewhere inside that building, a team of skilled hands would soon begin a surgery that could change a young girl's life forever. Daniel looked down the quiet city street and then back at his car. The 65-kilometer drive was finally over. But the hope it carried had just arrived. After the Mustang had disappeared down the quiet city streets, Daniel finally allowed himself to feel the exhaustion that had been building all night. The adrenaline that had carried him for 65 kilometers slowly began to fade, leaving behind a heavy but satisfying tiredness. He leaned against the car for a few moments, staring up at the hospital building where the operation was already underway. For the first time that night, he felt a sense of calm. He thought back over the events of the evening. It had started like any other day, working in his small repair shop, helping neighbors with their cars, finishing up late in the afternoon. Nothing in his ordinary routine had prepared him for the responsibility he had taken on. Yet, here he was, having transported a human heart across the night, racing against time, knowing that a child's life rested entirely in his hands. Even now, he struggled to believe how ordinary he had felt until the moment the container was handed over. It was only afterward, when he stepped outside and the cool night air touched his face, that the magnitude of what had happened began to sink in. The power of a single decision, the value of quick action, and the importance of every second had all become vividly real. Daniel knew that the world outside of the hospital would never notice this night in the same way he had. No headlines, no fanfare, no public recognition. But that did not matter. The gratitude that would flow silently from the family of Emily, the young girl now awaiting a new heart, was more than enough. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of courage and compassion go unseen. As he drove home slowly, the streets of his town were still quiet, the town itself bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. He thought about Emily's parents waiting nervously, hoping against hope. He imagined the hospital staff preparing the operating room with care and precision, knowing the importance of the moments ahead. And he imagined the tiny beating heart inside the container, so fragile yet full of life, ready to give a second chance to someone who needed it more than anything. By the time Daniel returned to his repair shop, the first hints of dawn were appearing along the horizon. The long night had left him physically drained but spiritually awake in a way he had never experienced before. Every action that night, the careful handling of the car, the focus on the road, the steady hands that gripped the steering wheel had mattered. Every decision, no matter how small, had contributed to saving a life. As he stepped inside the shop and set his keys on the counter, Daniel realized that ordinary people often face extraordinary moments without warning. Sometimes the difference between life and death, hope and despair, comes down to simple acts done with care, focus, and determination. The journey may have been 65 kilometers in distance, but in meaning, it was immeasurable. He would never forget the night the Mustang carried more than just metal and fuel. It carried hope, urgency, and the fragile life of a young girl. And for Daniel, that night was a quiet reminder that anyone can become a hero when the world needs it most, even without fame or recognition. Somewhere, behind the closed doors of a hospital operating room, Emily's heart would beat again. And for Daniel, the memory of that Mustang, the long drive, and the silent responsibility would stay with him forever, a testament to the quiet courage that can change lives in ways words cannot fully capture. The journey had ended, but its impact would last a lifetime.